before I get into the real part of the sermon, I just would like to point out something that what we have here is a wonderful example of our United Methodist connection in action. So, I'm a deacon. My primary appointment is as the Conference Disaster Ministry Coordinator and as the Conference UMBIM Coordinator. This is a newly combined role, and we're still trying to figure out how to combine the two positions. Now, I am on track to be ordained at the 2016 annual conference, and I do have an indirect relationship here at St. Paul. Pastor Rick and I were commissioned together, and we are participating in the same residency program. My secondary appointment at Allentown, Asbury, well, Bob Schenk used to be appointed here, and he was appointed to Asbury while I was at Asbury too. I went to seminary, or at least there was a little bit of overlap with Monica Geppert. Yeah, I'm name dropping here. You know, it's kind of like I'm name dropping here. So all these clergy working together, conference resources coming and helping a local church. I can't do anything without local churches supporting me. So we have this working togetherness, the essence of connectionalism. It's not just the bishop saying, "Oh, well, Pastor Rick's going to be your pastor." There's so much more to it than that. You know, it's all of us working together, and hopefully as neighbors. So will you pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our strength and Redeemer. Amen. Well, I asked Pastor Rick, about a few parameters. I don't like to surprise people too much. I don't want to go too far out of bounds. And he said, "Oh, well, we're pretty loose about things. So as long as you have something good to say, they'll listen." I said, "Oh boy, hours and hours." And I said, "No," he said, "closer to 15 minutes, 20 minutes. But if you go over, go ahead." And he said, "You would like to learn a little bit about my ministries." So I tried to integrate some of them together. I'm going to go off script in a couple of places based on your feedback. I like to read body language. So if I see some, I'll know I've gone just a little too far and back off and go, I'll keep working that area. But in my work as disaster coordinator, I hear and see many events that sound a lot like the parable we just heard. So I'd like to share one now. In the flooding caused by two major storms in 2011, that was Irene and Lee, and as I recall, that parking lot got loaded up with mud during one of those storms, did it not? But a family was stranded on the roof of their house. So a fire truck drove by, looked, just kept driving. Then a police car drove by, looked, and just kept driving by. Neither stopped to help and help that family. Then an illegal immigrant drove by, saw that that family was in need, parked his truck, pulled the small boat off the roof of his truck, and retrieved that family. This rescuer then took the family to a local motel and paid for 2 months' lodging in advance and promised to come back to cover their incidental expenses. So, who was the neighbor there? Okay, you probably figured I made that story up.
That's 2 months.
Yeah. I made that story up. Okay, I borrowed it from the parable of the Good Samaritan. But if you would have heard that in the news, you probably would have been shocked or even outraged that the people who were supposed to serve and protect the family ignored them and left them to die. Now, an illegal alien in the role of the Samaritan gives you a little taste of how the crowd would have felt about the Samaritan. Donald Trump's rhetoric is nothing compared to what Samaritans were looked upon as. They were scum. They were lower than low. So, when Jesus mentioned a Samaritan, everybody in the crowd was like, oh, Samaritan, yeah. Not one of us, one of them. Now, I could have retold the story using the pastor and lay leader in place of priest and Levite. Well, Pastor Rick's not here to defend himself, and I don't know your lay leader well enough to, do that. I don't want something thrown at me. Besides, you might have expected that. And parables are more effective when something unexpected happens. Same in any story. When there is that unexpected plot twist, you pay attention. And the parable is no different. There's something unexpected happening here, so you better pay attention. Now, just before Jesus tells the parable, he was asked, "Who is my neighbor?" Now, Jesus did not, pull out his little chart and start, the neighbor, and pull out the dictionary. No, he said, "Oh, who is my neighbor? Well, let me tell you a story." At the end of the story, the listeners did not say the Samaritan was the neighbor. No, they could not bring themselves to say that the Samaritan, who they all looked down upon, just because he was a Samaritan, was the one who acted like a neighbor. All they could do was answer, the one who showed mercy. I'm pretty sure the people remembered this story because they were told to do what the Samaritan did. Go and be like one of those people who you think are scum. Definitely something that would make me perk my ear. Ooh, yeah. If I'm supposed to be like somebody I wouldn't associate with. But is that the only surprise in the story? Oh, no. The priest and the Levite did not stop to help. They didn't even bother to cross the road to see if the traveler was still alive. Now, we see Jesus challenge religious authorities all the time. Here's yet another example. We are not told to emulate the priests or the Levites who worshiped correctly, prayed often, followed the rules to the letter, and tried to maintain true religion and maintain their culture. No, we were told that the neighbors emulate the one who reaches out to help. So, who is my neighbor? Well, let's ask, who is the good neighbor, though? Not just any neighbor, a good neighbor. Well, a good neighbor today. Well, that's the guy who keeps his lawn mowed and all the dandelions pulled. And inviting people who live near, okay, let's have a barbecue. But that really good neighbor is going to end the barbecue before you want to go to bed, because it's hard for you to sleep if everybody else is having fun. So, now, we've been judging neighbors by how quickly they clean up storm damage. A tornado goes through Whitehall, and some people were kind of slow at getting their roofs tarped and stuff, and yards cleaned up. And it's kind of, how dare them? And it's kind of, you just think, well, how long did it take you to do it? Well, I paid somebody to do it. Well, maybe they couldn't. It takes a while to clean up roof shingles. One, you have to find them. And you don't necessarily want to be mowing your lawn if you might have a roof shingle in your lawn. So the yards were getting a little unkempt. That's why I used the yard example. But, took a little while. Now, I really can't imagine ancient times being much different. Good neighbors were judged by how much they helped you out and made your life a little more comfortable, and followed the rules of your little community so that, whereas they probably didn't have to deal much with green grass and dandelions in that region, they had their own routines. How do you keep your house looking? But no, we are told that good neighbors do so much more than just be considerate to those around them. The neighbor reached out and helped. Now, I've seen good neighbors during the various flood and storm responses. I've also seen people trying to take advantage of their neighbor's generosity. I've seen first responders and local government officials go that extra mile in helping residents and loaning each other equipment. I've also seen resistance to placing FEMA trailers in communities, and townships fining homeowners for having too much trash out for trash pickup. And I'm just sitting there thinking, well, wait a minute, their basement was flooded, everything is ruined. Of course they have a lot of trash. We were kind of passive aggressive in one of those situations. So we got one of those bagsters, not to give a commercial for anybody. We placed it in the middle of the community and said, everybody, come throw your trash here. And we took it away. The next week, the township revoked the fines, realizing that they were not going to be able to stay in office if they treated their people that way. Say, well, it really isn't the idea of neighborliness, but it felt good to help people out. Maybe next time the township will think about that. Now, entire communities can be called upon to be a neighbor. Let me tell you, now this is a real story. This one's real. It's about an Umpqua flood bucket. You're probably familiar with those. It's just a big old bucket, cleaning supplies, little face mask, gloves, clothesline, scrub brush, some kind of a liquid cleaner, stuff you need to clean up after a flood. Their real name is a cleaning bucket. I do not ask people to assemble cleaning buckets. That's something you keep in your basement that you have to go down and pick up every week to go clean your bathroom. No. The flood bucket, that's cool. I can get people to go out and assemble flood buckets. Now, the bucket was assembled by a Lutheran congregation. It was delivered to the Lehigh Valley Outreach Depot. Probably familiar with it, it's just up the road. That's a ministry of Wesley United Methodist Church. People at the Outreach Depot confirmed the contents and delivered it to Wesley Church in Bethlehem for the district disaster team to use locally. We had need for them there. Now, this particular bucket was transferred to Asbury so I would have easy access to it. There, the bucket was picked up by a UCC pastor and delivered to Pine Grove in Schuylkill County. That's, I'd say, about a 90-minute drive from here, if that much. Now, they are in a different district. We're Northeast District, they're Northwest District. There, that bucket was distributed by a local Lions Club, working as part of a coalition of voluntary agencies. So, we had a lot of people and groups doing a lot of small things to get this one bucket of cleaning supplies to where it could help a flood victim. So collectively, we stopped, crossed the road, and helped the beat-up traveler. We were not concerned about denominational differences. Yeah, Lutheran assembled the bucket, so what? The Methodist was storing it, and we were calling it an Umpqua flood bucket. That gives it the name recognition. Yeah, okay, that's a little part. A UCC pastor picked it up. So, okay, we're up to 3 denominations now. And then the Lions Club. Oh, wait a minute, they're a secular organization. Oh, we can't work. Hey, wait a minute. It doesn't matter who helps. We are all helping. The idea is for the entire community to help the entire community. Oh, and by the way, the city of Pine Grove gave us warehouse space. So we had the government, private individuals, churches, other organizations, all working together. We were participating as neighbors, 2 neighbors, in a vital ministry. And to paraphrase James 2:15-16, probably familiar with the passage, but to paraphrase, if a brother or sister's home is flooded and the house is full of mud and mold, and you say, go in peace, keep warm and breathe easy, but do not hand them a flood bucket and help clean the basement, what good is that? Like I said, during that storm, we stopped, crossed the road, helped the beat-up traveler. But are we willing to continue to reach out and check on those and work with communities and people affected by Irene Lee and some of the more recent storms to truly emulate the Samaritan? You're thinking, Irene Lee? I'll get back to that in a minute. We're not done. Now, Rick said, don't give him a seminary lecture, but I have to give you a little bit of a seminary lecture here. Somebody said, oh, 2 months. Yeah, that's a long time. You must have made that up. Well, actually, I didn't, because 2 denarii would cover 2 months' lodging at an inn at that time. That's why I said they paid 2 months for that motel stay. That's what the Samaritan did. 2 months. And promised to come back and pay more if needed. And the Samaritan did not ask for anything in return. Nowhere in that story did the Samaritan ask for anything. Put the amount in another perspective. That was 2 days' wages for a common laborer. So when we stop to think, would I give 2 days' wages to a complete stranger? Not only a complete stranger, one that I probably don't like, or at a minimum, that person doesn't like me. Would I be willing to pay, 2 months lodging for somebody? And remember, this traveler was beat up. He needed medical assistance. I'd hate to think how much 2 months of rehab would cost, especially if you're paying it out of your own pocket. So, are we starting to see what Jesus was telling us to do? We're sacrificing for our neighbors, not just helping them in a moment. Now, in some of these more recent storms, one of my favorite activities, mucking and gutting. Yeah, yuck is a closer, but yeah, if you've ever been in a basement that's been flooded, yuck is a very good description. Well, that's taking place from the recent storms. Rebuilding is starting on the recent storms, and just this year, we were finally able to close the books and say that all the rebuilding that we were committed to from Irene Lee and Sandy in the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference was completed. Yes, it took 4 years. It took 4 years. Now, something that we have to consider in some of these more recent storms, there have been some floods localized. There have been some tornadoes. Well, oil tanks were damaged in this. I don't know if you have oil or if you use gas or electric, but if you have oil and your oil tank is damaged, what do you have to do? Well, you have to get rid of the old oil You have to clean and repair the tank, and then you have to get new oil. It's something you don't necessarily think about in the summer, but all of a sudden, it's going to be cold, and you're going to want oil heat. It's very expensive to get rid of the old oil. It's almost as expensive, in some cases more expensive, to get rid of your old oil than to buy the new oil. That was an eye-opener to me. Well, because apparently the old oil is an environmental hazard. Okay. But still, it's these little things you don't necessarily think about, that when we step in as a church and say we're going to help, we sometimes run into these unexpected situations. But most importantly, it's not that oil tank and that oil. It was the family. It's the family we're reaching out to help. That is what is important, helping the people in the communities. Now, all these things take time, they take labor, and they take financial assistance. In some areas of Luzerne County, it was expected to take 2.5 years to recover from the Irene-Lee storms, based on our preliminary estimates. Well, it's 4 years later, and that work is still not complete. That area was impacted by several other storms, a couple harsh winters. It's difficult to tell what was really Irene-Lee damage, what's Sandy damage, what was just winter problems. Well, maybe the winter problem was caused because the roof still hadn't been repaired from Sandy, which was also damaged in Irene, and it's a mess. If you've ever seen the paperwork involved in trying to figure that out, it's a nightmare. Fortunately, the church does not care about that paperwork. The roof needs fixed. We help fix the roof. The insurance companies can fight over everything else. We made a commitment to work with the community until the work was finished, and we are honoring that commitment. The Luzerne County government is also honoring their commitment. Now, earlier this month, the county bought several houses that could not be brought up to current code and flood certification, and is allowing voluntary organizations like Habitat for Humanity, Salvation Army, and UMCOR to go onto these properties and reclaim any materials that the groups could use to further their work. What was surprising to me is that the government of Luzerne County did not put any stipulations on those materials that they had to be used in Luzerne County. They said, wherever your groups can use them, use them. All too often, we hear of governments and voluntary groups getting into conflicts and having different sets of rules that they have to follow. So I wanted to hold this one up as an example of an effective partnership. Luzerne County knew that these other groups brought materials in from all over the place, and that we have responding to disasters all over the place. So there's a kitchen sink. If it's needed in Carbon County, so what? It's just a border. Don't worry about it. So we stopped, we crossed the road, we helped. We came back to make sure everybody was okay. We stayed and are staying and continuing to help. So we are being a good neighbor. Now, I'm with UMCOR, kind of. Did you know that UMCOR in the United States has about a dozen paid people? That's not very many. There's 3 in the headquarters staff, and then there's 9, 10 or so out as consultants. That's it. UMCOR is funded through 1 great hour sharing, not apportionments. When you respond to an UMCOR appeal and say this is going to go to storm response. 100% of that appeal goes to storm response. None of it goes back to overhead. 100% of what you donate to an appeal goes to that appeal. It's a great way to reach out to the community. They know that if they give money to UMCOR, it's going to go to that cause. As a church, we support UMCOR through the One Great Hour sharing so that this happens. We are providing a mechanism. But then what does that mean for the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference? Disaster Greg. How big is the line item for my salary from the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference? Anybody want to take a guess? I heard 0. Somebody was paying attention. We don't get apportioned money. It's all second mile giving. So, private groups, church groups, all look at that and say, oh, we can do that. It's a great act of faith. 75 years, UMCOR has been doing it that way. Never has there been any apportionment for UMCOR in the 75 years of its existence. It started out as a relief agency for war-torn China and is now one of the most respected international relief and development agencies in the world. Reaching out to help neighbors. Now UMCOR does that thing, it's that initial, that early stuff, but UMCOR is not the one that works there for the 4+ years. That's UMVIM. So there's that dual coordination role. UMCOR, UMVIM. Where does it start and stop? Well, who cares? Not to throw too many politicians under the bus, but they seem to care. You know, who gets credit for what? Well, I'm going to bring back a politician from a while ago, Harry Truman. We can accomplish so much more when we don't worry about who gets the credit. And that's the way the UMCOR and UMVIM partnership works. Yeah, we have some people that are trained to go in the early phases, and then the church groups can stay there for however long is needed. Hopefully, a local church picks up and coordinates everything for a local environment. Church groups go in 4 years. Well, Haiti, it's been, 12 years now since that last major earthquake, I believe. Still there, still helping. So being a neighbor, it's not defined by our intentions or perceived positions in society. Who is the neighbor? Well, it's the one who took pity and took action. The neighbor stopped to help, got personally involved, contributed financially, set up a support mechanism, and stayed involved long enough to follow through with a promise to make certain the traveler returned to well-being and the innkeeper would not suffer a financial setback. When Jesus tells his followers to go and do likewise, we are not called to help only in the moment to the neighbors we know, but to boldly reach out and continue to be involved or to become involved in the lives of the neighbors we have not yet met. Amen. Amen. And before I step away, I wanted to mention something about the 23rd Psalm. That's one of the two passages or portions of the Bible that I think have been hijacked. The 23rd Psalm, it's become associated with funerals. And then there's that passage that Paul wrote in Corinthians about love. That's been hijacked. It's almost exclusively for weddings. But both of them are so important in disaster work. In that immediate aftermath of the disaster, yes, some of those people are walking through the valley of the shadow of death. And they fear no evil because somebody showed up and helped them. The presence of God in these disasters is sometimes you. You show up, you're there, you provide comfort. And if you're not doing it personally, you've helped set up a support mechanism to do this. And likewise, the passage about love. Love is patient. Well, if it's going to take you 4 years to recover, yeah, there's some patience involved in there. Do you love the people enough to stay and work with them? You might not like them. They might drive you crazy. But when you show that love, you're showing that you're a good neighbor. Amen. 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 Amen.